Alright guys, welcome back to the next part in our blogging app series. In the previous video, we took a look at authoring a post, and in this video, we're going to do the flip side of actually viewing and rendering out posts that we've posted or somebody else has posted. So without further ado, drop a like down below, jump into your project, and first things first, we're going to go ahead and give this a run, just so we can get our simulator primed and good to go for what we're about to build out. Essentially, what we want to do is build out a table view with some custom cells, and those custom cells are what we are going to use to actually render out a post, both for a preview and when the user taps into a post to actually show the entire post. So if you guys recall, this is our home tab. We don't have anything going on here. And in our profile, we do see the title for the post that we had created, which is wow, this thoughts app is awesome. Now, this is a pretty simple cell. We want to have our custom cell. So let's get straight away into it. So I'm going to open up the views folder here. We're actually going to create a folder called cells, since we're going to have quite a few, so we want to keep it organized. Let's go ahead and start creating some new files, and let's talk about the cells that we want. So we actually need one custom cell in here, which is going to be our header image cell, and then we also need a preview cell. So I'm going to go ahead and create a UI table view cell. This is going to be a post preview table view cell, just like that. Go ahead and create it, and let's create the other one as well, which is going to be our header, or post header I should say, table view cell. So we'll say post header table view cell. Go ahead and create it as well. And we're going to start by doing the preview. Now, what the heck is a preview? The preview cell is what we're going to use to show here in the profile a preview of the article. It's going to have the image on the left and then the title on the right hand side. And you can lay it out a little differently if you'd like, but that's what we're going to do. So let's get started in here by deleting all of this template code. And let's first add a static constant, which is an identifier. We're going to go ahead and override the initializer. We want init with a style. We want to say super init with a style, as well as that reuse identifier. We're going to say content view dot clips to bounds is going to be true. Go ahead and bring in that required initializer, just like that. We're going to want to layout sub views, say super layout sub views. We're going to say prepare for reuse, super, prepare for reuse, and that is not how you spell prepare for reuse. There we go. And finally, we're going to want a way to configure this cell with some type of data. So I'm going to go ahead and just say with a string. And what we're actually going to want in here is probably going to be a view model, but for now, just to get the function actually stubbed out, let's go with a string. So now that we have this, we want to add some subviews. So what are the subviews that are going to go in here? They're pretty simple. We're going to first bring in a image view. Now I'm going to go ahead and call it a post image view of type image view, and with the anonymous closure pattern, we're going to go ahead and create this image view. We'll go ahead and return it like that. And in here, we're going to set the content mode to be scale to fill, but we want to say aspect fill so it maintains its aspect ratio. We're also going to say masks to bounds on the layer is true, and clips to bounds is true. And I'm also going to give this a subtle corner radius of 8 points so it has a nice look on the corners. Let's go ahead and add this as a sub view as a part of our content view, just like that. And the next sub view that we need here is a post title label. Once again, this is going to be private. We're going to say post title label, just like that. It's going to be of type UI label. And in here, we're going to go ahead and configure and return a label. We'll say return label here. Label number of lines will be 0, so we can line wrap. We are also going to go ahead and bump up the font size. I'm going to say the font is a system font of size maybe 20, and we're going to give it a weight of medium, so it's a little bolder, and we could always adjust this as needed, but this is probably sufficient for now. And don't forget, we need to add this as a sub view as well. So we're going to say content view, add sub view, our post title label. Now, what else do we need to do? So prepare for reuse is pretty simple, so we'll knock that out first. We're going to nil out the text as well as the image on our image view. Now in layout subviews, this is pretty straightforward as well. We're going to set a size for both the image view and the label. So we're going to say the post image view, which is going to be on the left-hand side. It's going to have a frame, which is going to be CG rect. We'll say for the X, we can go ahead and grab the insets. There's a separator insets, and we're going to go ahead and get the left of that. That'll be the left. The Y, we're going to go ahead and say 5. Now, what is the width and height going to be? So the height is going to be content view dot height minus 10. So we have a 5-point buffer vertically, and we want this to be a square, so the width is going to be the same as well. And finally, to do the post title label frame, we're going to relatively position it to our image here. So the Y will be 5. The height, once again, will be content view.height minus 10. The X is going to be the post image view.right. And we're going to say plus 5. And finally, we need to do the width. And this one is going to be the content view.width subtracting 10. As well, rather, let's say subtracting 5, subtracting separator inset dot left, and finally subtracting post image view dot width. So a couple calculations there. Hopefully we've got that correct, and let me go ahead and line break this so it's a little more legible, and we should be good to go in terms of using this cell. So let's go ahead and before we actually even use a cell, let's create a view model object on here, which is going to be a class. So I'm going to actually create it outside here. We'll go ahead and say this is the name of the cell, suffixed by view model. And we want two things on here by default. The first thing is going to be the title. Next thing is going to be the image URL, which will be a URL optional. And we want a mutable image data. And the reason that we want this is because once we have actually fetched, the image from the URL the first time, we're going to go ahead and cache that image data so we don't have to do it redundantly over and over again. Let's go ahead and add an initializer here. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. We're also going to do the image URL just like that. And in our parentheses, or curlies I should say, we're going to say title is title and self.image URL is image URL just like that. And now we can actually go and use this guy in our configure function. We're going to say configure with a view model, which will be of our view model type. Label is pretty simple, so we'll knock that out first and foremost. I'm going to say post title label dot text is going to be the view model dot title. Now the image is a little more tricky, so I'm going to say if let data is our view model dot image data. We're going to use the image data to create an image, so we'll go ahead and say post image view dot image is going to be a UI image with said data. And if we don't have the image, what we know we need to do is fetch the image if we have a URL. So we'll say else if let URL is view model dot the image URL. Keep in mind this is optional, so we need to make sure it's not nil. We can go ahead and fetch the image and cache it. So to fetch, we're going to use a session data task. So we're going to say URL session shared. We'll say data task with a URL and a callback. So there's our URL, there is our callback, and we're going to ignore the response and the error in our case. Let's go ahead and say guard let data equals data. And assuming we have data, we need to do two things. First up is we need to cache the data as part of the view model, just like that. And the other thing we want to do is actually update on the main thread our image view. So we can actually go ahead and copy and paste that and make sure you do self optional. And we want to make sure we capture self in a weak capacity here so we don't leak any memory. Also, don't forget to do task.resume, otherwise you're never going to actually kick off this task to fetch the actual image data. And now, finally, even though I've said it 5 times, this cell is actually good to go in terms of being used. So let's go ahead and plug this guy in to our controllers, and specifically the profile view controller. We're going to come into here and we want to create, we already have a table view actually, but we want to register this cell to the table view. So we had registered a vanilla cell here. We're going to update that to be that type of cell for this dot identifier. Let's go down to the very bottom where we're actually dequeuing the cell, and we'll go ahead and configure this cell appropriately. So let's see if I can find it. Looks like it's right here. We're going to go ahead and say guard let cell is going to be a cell with this ID. And let's go ahead and see what else we need to do. We want to make sure we cast it as the appropriate cell. Otherwise, we're not going to get access to the proper APIs on it that we added, specifically in our case, the configure function. And we're going to say here cell.configure, and we want to create a view model. Now the title is pretty simple. It's going to be our post.title. And the image URL will be post, and you guessed it, we already have a header image URL on here, so we'll just go ahead and pass that guy in. And that's all we need to do on here. Now, I do want to go ahead and bump up the height of the cell, so I'm going to say height for row at index path, and maybe we'll go with, I don't know, perhaps we'll go with 100 and see what that looks like, and we'll adjust as needed. So go ahead, hit the run button, everybody hold your breath, cross all your fingers, let's make sure I didn't make a silly typo, and hopefully our profile is going to start looking a whole lot nicer. And after this is good to go, we'll tackle tapping on the post so we can actually view it in full screen. Alright, gonna go ahead and tap on this, and there is our image view, there is our title, looking pretty good. So once we tap on this, we want to actually show the post. So when we tap on it, we get this empty black screen, which is not good. So let's go ahead and tackle that. So right now when we tap on it, what we're doing is we're actually passing in, or we're creating a post or a view post view controller. So I'm going to go ahead and tap into here, and this view controller is entirely empty right now, so we want to go ahead and build this out. So what do we want on here? So first and foremost, we want to set a background color, since that's pretty important. We want to have nice aesthetics in our app, and we also want to override view did layout sub views, since we're going to have a table view momentarily. The next thing we want to do is we want to require that anyone that's instantiating this controller actually goes and passes in a blog post element inside of here, since the job of this view controller is really to render out a blog post. So it's going to be required as a part of the initializer. And don't forget to do super.init, passing a nil for both nib name and the bundle. So there is the initializers that we are going to need, and in the lifecycle, now we can start tackling actually putting out the subviews in the places they need to go. So we're going to have a UI table view in here, like I mentioned earlier in the video. Now our table view essentially will have 3 types of cells. It's going to have the title, the header, and the body. And later on, we might actually add the poster cell, which is going to be basically, the author's name of the cell. So let's go ahead and say let table is going to be an instance of the table view. We're going to return said table. Now in here, we want to register 2 cells. The first one is going to be a standard UI table view cell, a vanilla cell, I should say, .self for the ID of cell, just like that. And the other one is the other custom cell that we had created, which we had called a post header table view cell. Now we didn't really put anything in there quite yet, but it is going to have an identifier, so we can cheat a little bit and just type it out even though it won't autocomplete. Let's go ahead and build that cell out, since it's pretty trivial. You guys will notice in a moment how trivial it is. So let me go ahead and open the views and jump back into our cells. And let's go ahead and stick an identifier on here first and foremost. And let's talk about the stuff we actually need on here. So all we really need on here is a image view. Now we can actually cheat from this cell just a little bit, and we can actually copy every single thing in here. And we're going to tweak the view model as well momentarily, and we're just going to drop the label. So we have a post image view already. So I'm going to drop the label here. We're going to drop the corner radius, and let's go ahead and adjust this. Now, since we dropped the label, we no longer need to add that as a sub view. We no longer need to lay it out. And in fact, the way that we want to lay out this image view is going to match the entirety of the content view like that. No more label, let's get rid of that. No more of that, we can get rid of that as well. And inside of here, all that I'm going to go ahead and do is we're going to say configure with a image URL, which is going to be an image URL optional, just like that. Go ahead and update that, and we are good to go. So if you guys take a look at the premise of this, one thing that we are missing is the data, right? And this shouldn't be image URL, this should be some sort of data. So let me actually undo that for a moment, and you guys will see what we need to do. We can actually go ahead and create a view model up here, just like we did for the other cell. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And inside of here, we want to go ahead and create, this guy with a image URL optional. Make sure you make that capital. All right. Self.image URL is image URL, and this is going to be the image data. Let's make sure we spell image correctly, slightly important, just like that. And we can use this down in our configure function now. So we're going to go ahead and say that it goes there, and I believe we named it accordingly, so it should be the same names. I'll just type it out again to verify, and that's it. That's all we need to do in this cell. So this cell, honestly, all it contains is a header view. So let's jump back into our, I believe we called it a view post view controller. There it is. And if you go ahead and type in .identifier again, you'll see autocomplete should kick in and it should be good to go. Now, because we are using a table view, we need to conform to two protocols. One protocol, actually, in this case. So we want the data source. That's the requirement. We're not going to want interaction with the delegate. However, I am going to include it here just in case, because we are going to want to, change some other things that might reside in the delegate, like the height of the cell, etc., etc. So now that we've got the table view here, let's start using it. So we want to go ahead and add it as a subview. We're going to assign its delegate as well as its data source, just like that. We're going to also give it a frame, and we want to implement the table view functions for the data source and delegate. So we're going to say number of sections is going to be 1. Number of rows is going to be 3. Now, how do I know it's 3? Well, it's going to be the title, the image, and the text. And we're going to want cell for row at index path. And inside of here, how do we know which cell we want to render? So we already know what the index is, so I can actually say this is going to be indexPath.row, and we can actually switch on the index. We know that the first cell is going to be title, the second cell here should be the image, and the third one will be the text. So accordingly, we can switch on this guy. So we're going to say switch on the index, and where case is 0, do something, where case is 1, do something, where case is 2, do something, and finally default, go ahead and say fatal error, which would essentially crash our app, but we should never get into that state. So now we're going to see errors up here because we didn't actually fill these out, so let's go ahead and do that. So in our first case, we're going to say let cell is a table view dot DQ a reusable cell with a ID and cell index path. This is going to be cell. And what do we want to actually do here? We're going to say return cell and the text label of said cell. Let's make sure we got this spelled out correctly. Cell for index path is what I need there. All right. And in this case, we're going to say the text label dot text is going to be post dot title. Keep in mind this post is a global variable on this class, and that is where we are getting it from. So let me go ahead and just copy and paste this to this one here. The only thing that's going to change in this case is the text is going to be post dot, I believe we called it text, there we are. And in this one here, what we want to change is the actual type of cell. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and say DQ a cell. The ID is going to be a post header table view cell dot identifier. We also want to make sure we appropriately cast our cell class like that. And instead of assigning the text label, we're going to say in here configure with a view model. So we're going to initialize it with post.image header image URL, just like that. And this view model internally will handle the caching. So I think we're pretty much good to go here. Let's make sure we don't have any errors. We have not managed the sizes yet, so let's go ahead and do that as well, the sizes of the cell in particular. And we also haven't described, what is selectable. So the cell for the title should not be selectable. So we're going to say selection style, I believe is what I'm looking for, which is going to be none. And we want this to be none for all three of these cells. We don't want the user to be able to tap on, these cells and expect it to go somewhere, right, on the header, the image, or the body. Now, respectively, we do want to give it a height for row at index path. And similarly to how we used our, index and we switched on it here, we're going to do the same thing down here. Instead of actually creating cells and returning those, we are simply going to return a fixed size. So for the actual title and the body, we're going to use something called a UI table view automatic size dimension. So we're going to say return UI table view dot automatic dimension, and that's going to allow the cell to automatically size itself. So we'll go ahead and do that here as well, and we're going to do that here as well. And for the image, I'm going to go ahead and say make this maybe, 150 tall, right? That'll be a nice header image size. Speaking of, self-sizing cells, we want to also make sure we don't forget to say text label dot number of lines is going to be 0. That'll allow the text label to actually line wrap. And now I think we're actually good to go. So let's go ahead and give it a run. And let's make sure we can tap on in to a post on the user's profile and see what happens. So it looks like we actually have an error. So let's see what I screwed up in here. All right, this makes sense. We tap on a post and it's saying we need to pass it in. So there is our initializer. So we already have a collection of posts and we're going to pass in the nth post that was tapped on. So we're going to say index path dot row, just like that. So let's go ahead and give it a run. Make sure that we can actually tap into posts on the profile. And essentially, we're going to do something very similar in the home tab here, except we're going to query posts from all users. So let's go ahead and let's tap on this guy. Boom, there is our text for the title. There's our text for the actual content and our header image. Now, two things that are weird. One thing, the title of this guy should not be, the title of the post, since we already have a cell for that. So I'm going to go ahead and call this post here. And we can also say vc.navigation item, large title display mode is going to be none, or never, I believe is what it's called. There it is, never. The other thing that's kind of weird is we want this first cell to have a larger font size. And that's just by virtue of it's the title, and it should probably look larger. So let's go into where we configure the cell here. And since we're not using a view model in our case, we're just going to do it inline. I am going to go ahead and say the font is going to be a system font of size 20. And maybe we can even go with like 24, 25. And we're going to give it a weight of bold. So go ahead and give it a run one more time. Let's make sure my nitty-gritty UI tweaks are looking better. And then we'll jump on over to the feed. And that'll be fairly straightforward to put together, and we'll see that momentarily. So there is our title. You can see it's line wrapping. There is our image view, and there is our post. Now, our actual post isn't very long because we didn't, type out too much. But if you had a longer post, it would, grow as needed. And this whole thing is in fact scrollable since it is a table view. So that would handle, the scrollability. So looks like we can view posts. We are coming along nicely. Let's go ahead and figure out the home feed. So this is pretty simple as well. One thing that we can do, so let me jump actually to our home view controller. One thing that we could do and actually need to do is create a table view here on this controller, which is going to hold our posts. Now, we already have a table view created over in our profile view controller. So what we are going to do is we are going to completely cheat And we're going to grab this table view and copy and paste it right here in our home view controller. So I'm going to go ahead here and we are going to go and say view, add subview for the table view. Now we want to make sure we add the subview before we add the floating action button, and that's to make sure the floating action button for the compose button here is on the z-axis above the table view. Otherwise your table view is going to be, overlapping that compose button. So let's go ahead and assign its frame as well as the table's delegate and data source. Now we're going to copy the delegate and data source functions in here in a moment as well, but let me at least go ahead and conform to those protocols respectively. And it's going to yell at me that we're not actually conforming, so we're going to cheat one more time and we're going to come in here and I'm going to copy and paste the table view function. So here's 1, there's 2, 3, and 4, and I don't believe we want that. We actually are going to want to fetch posts, so maybe I'll copy this as well. So let me jump back into home view controller, and at the very bottom here, we're going to paste this on in. All right, so here we're going to say fetching home feed. Now in our database manager, we don't exactly have a function yet that's implemented to fetch all posts from a user, but for now, I am going to go ahead and just delete that to make sure all of this is at least working and compiling. So go ahead and hit Command B to build. And the last thing left to do to actually populate this feed is write out a way to fetch all posts. So I'm going to go ahead and say fetch all posts, and we're going to call this function from the bottom of view.did_load right there. And finally, like I mentioned, in our database manager, we have a function that we stubbed out that we need to implement, which I believe is get all posts, just like that. And this is going to give us an array of posts. We're going to say in here, weak self, so we don't leak any memory. We're going to say self.posts is posts. And finally, we are going to say dispatch queue main async self.tableview, go ahead and reload yourself. Now, keep in mind, we haven't implemented this function yet, so I'm going to command click it. We're going to say jump to definition, and boom, there it is. Let's talk about implementing this. So it's quite simple, actually. What we want to do is get all users, then from each user, get their posts. So let's take a look at how we're getting posts here. So we're getting an email, and off of that, we're saying from users, the document in question, go ahead and get the posts and get all documents essentially from it. So we already have a way to get posts with a given email. Now, all that we need to do is get all the emails. So let's see how we want to approach this. We have database.users. So let me go ahead and do this. And we can go ahead and say, go ahead and get all the documents. Now this is going to give us a snapshot and the error, and we can say guard let the documents is going to be the snapshot dot snapshot dot documents, and from the documents we're going to go ahead and say compact map. We're going to say $0.data, and let's also verify that the error in fact here is nil. Now, assuming that we have gotten the data for each of these users, if we jump on over to Firebase, you'll see in each of the user documents, we should have, let me click on this, we should have a key in here for their email, which is in fact right there. So from this guy, we're going to get the email by saying, let emails is going to be documents, and we are going to compact map this, and this is going to return $0, and we want to get email, and we can actually go ahead and say this $0 data, this is going to be string and any, so we know it's a dictionary. And in this case, we want to say go ahead and return this as a string, just like that. So this will give us a collection of all the emails of every single user that we know about. So let's make sure that we don't have any errors. It looks like we do, so let's see what the heck is going on here. All right, so that is a string. We're saying documents, compact map, and let's see what this is actually yelling about. Dictionary string any element, aka. All right, so essentially what it's yelling at us about is the fact that we are trying to, use the nth element and get a string from that. So let's see what documents is here. All right, so documents looks like it's a single dictionary. And the reason that this is screwed up is because we're compact mapping here, and we wanted this to be an array. And actually, we don't even need this here, I just realized, because documents by default is going to give us an array of dictionaries. So we can go ahead and try that one more time. So we'll say emails as an array of strings, and this is going to be documents dot compact map $0. From this, we care about email, and this guy is going to be casted as a string. So assuming we actually have strings, we're going to say guard that the emails collection is not empty. And if it is, of course, we're going to say go ahead and return. And the completion handler, we're going to say we couldn't find any posts. But if it's not empty, what we want to go ahead and do is we want to call this function here to get posts with the given email address. So we're going to say for email in emails, go ahead and say self.getPosts, and we want to pass in that email, and there is a completion block which is going to give us user posts. Now this is user specific, so we do need to aggregate them. So we are getting a little more complex. So let's talk about what else we want to do here to make sure we keep our memory and perf top of mind. So we are going to say weak self, so we don't leak any memory. That's pretty important. Let's see if we are building. Looks like we do have an error in fact here. This should be email singular, just like that. We're saying for email in emails. All right, let's see why this is yelling at me here. This is going to give us an array of strings, so emails. All right, so let's see what's going on. Emails is an array of string, and we're saying for email in emails. That looks correct to me. Something looks a little off here. Let's see what's going on. Cannot find email in scope. I probably have a silly typo. Yep, I in fact do have a silly typo. Happens often. That's all right. So what we want to do is we want to create a dispatch group here. And a dispatch group is a way you can, group together multiple async operations. So every single time we enter the for loop, we're going to say group.enter. And every time we leave, or get the callback for each of these, we're going to say group.leave. And here I am going to go ahead and say results. We can go ahead and actually say result is going to be an array of posts, and by default it's going to be empty. Now this is going to be a blog post. That's our model. And in here we can go ahead and say append to results the user posts that we have gotten back. Now I believe user posts can be empty, which is perfectly fine. So let's see why this is yelling at me here. Looks like it's not quite happy, no exact matches. So let's see what's going on. Results is a array of blog post. Let's see what's going on. All right, we're appending to it. So it looks like it should be correct. It should be happy with it. Let me go ahead and do a command B. Let's make sure it's working all right. All right, so maybe it's because we have it inside the closure here. So I'm going to go ahead and stick this up here and see if that makes it a bit happier. Looks like it should. We're going to go ahead and say this is results, lowercase, and we're going to try to append. The reason it's yelling at us is we're going to say append contents of. That's what I was looking for, because we want to append the contents of another array. So we don't necessarily want to just append an array and get a two-dimensional array. We want to append the contents of a subsequent array. And once we're done with all of these, we want our dispatch group to notify us that we have successfully gone and actually fetched, what we needed to fetch. It's going to notify us on the background thread, and we are going to execute in here. And what are we going to execute? We're going to call the completion handler and pass in results. So this function is a bit more involved. Hopefully that made sense. Let me go ahead and add some prints in here, and we'll make sure that everything is looking all right. So we're going to say emails, and in here, I'm going to say print out the fact that we got feed posts, and it's going to be result.count, just like that. I believe we can go ahead and give it a run, and I think we're already calling this function from home view controller, so we should see posts here. And if we don't see posts, at bare minimum in our console, we should go ahead and see some logs. So look at that, we're seeing our posts. Let me go ahead and click on it, and boom, we can actually load it from our feed. Now let me go ahead and actually create another post here. So we're going to go ahead and choose a image as soon as our image picker decides to load. We'll go with these nice flowers here, and we're going to say, this is the coolest thing ever. Let's go ahead and type in a post. The quick brown fox, not box, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. Since that's the first thing that popped into my head, we're going to go ahead and hit the post button there. Now, one thing you'll notice after this dismisses is our feed doesn't automatically update. And the reason is because we need to fire a notification to let our feed know that, we can go ahead and update itself. The other thing that we probably want to add here is a way for, this to show us that the post is in progress. I suspect it's really slow because the upload of the image is quite slow. That's all right though, but let's go ahead and close and reopen the app. And we should see 2 posts here. Now I want to validate that our posts are actually coming through. We can go ahead and tap on it. It's going to go ahead and open, and boom, looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. So we've got our home feed set up, we've got profile set up, and in the next video, we're going to continue onwards with our app and, taking into account how many articles the user has read and showing our paywall. We'll also go ahead and sprinkle in some things such as, automatically updating the feed, showing a spinner when the user goes and posts an article so it doesn't look like our app is just hung or broken, etc., etc. So that is all I've got for you guys in today's video. Drop a like down below if you haven't done so already. Subscribe to the channel if you're into iOS, Swift UI, tech videos, the whole 9 yards. And don't hesitate to leave a comment if you hit any errors, anything weird in Xcode. Always love to help as much as I can. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you all on the next one.